So, hi everyone. Good afternoon. This is such a privilege and honor to do this. I have kind of shared maybe devotionals with my team and sometimes with my family, but I've never really shared the word. So, I'm so excited, but I'm also really nervous. So, do excuse me and maybe just say a breath prayer. So, I'm going to cut my video now and go straight into the message. So, something about this passage just has always delighted me, this storm. And I'm going to just start by, because I think we hear storm quite often, just a dictionary definition first of what a storm is. Okay, a storm is a heavy fall of rain, snow, or hail, a violent outbreak of thunder and lightning marked by strong winds. Now, a little bit about the Sea of Galilee, where the storm kind of took place. It's not really a sea, it was kind of a landlocked freshwater lake. Okay, but that's not important here. But okay, so I'm just starting with something about this passage again. Like I said, it's really interesting. And Jesus is now sleeping at the back. Now I have looked at both the accounts, the one in Mark chapter 4 as well as in Matthew chapter 8. And so it starts with like Jesus. Where is Jesus right now while the storm is taking place? He's sleeping, and it's not, mind you, like a nap. He's not like just dozing off, but Mark actually says he's sleeping on a cushion. So that means like he's really comfortable right now. And, even though the boat was rocking and all, like his sleep was so deep. And even his disciples probably, they would have been screaming and shouting because I guess now if you've seen movies of maybe turbulence in the flight or like a similar thing, like even a bus or usually the passengers when they know like like either they've met with a crash or there's a fire, they'll be screaming. So I'm assuming here, little holy assumption, that the disciples also would have been screaming and shouting like, oh my gosh, we're gonna die, like. But Jesus was still sleeping through all this, all this. Now, what I was so confused about is their reaction. Now, was this a very, because most of them were fishermen in that boat, right? And their reaction really puzzled me. Like, are they, wouldn't they have been familiar with storms, or was this one of these, the worst storms that they were ever in? And these are fishermen, they were not like tourists. Now, if they were tourists, I'd understand that reaction, right? They're in a boat, they're just going from point A to point B. The weather person said nothing about the storm. They checked the weather report. Okay, blue skies, shiny sun, everything's going to be okay. But then suddenly the storm comes and catches them off guard. That I'd understand. But these fishermen who have been like every day in and day out on the sea, suddenly like, why are they like screaming and shouting? And it's not just panic. It's not like a mild worry. It was a full-blown anxiety attack. So much so that it says that they actually woke up Jesus while like shouting. And I think so far, I think their dealings with Jesus would have been really polite, right? Like we don't see any tantrums with Jesus earlier on. But here they actually scream shouting at him like, and what did they could have said like, oh master, wake up, master. There's a storm, master. Please help us, Lord, save us. But no, they actually shout, don't you care that we perish? Okay, now the Gospels record the events a little differently. Now, if we look at Matthew, it says first that after the disciples wake him up and say, Lord, save us, we are going to drown. Jesus says, like, why are you afraid? You have so little faith. Then he gets up and rebukes the wind. But now in Mark, it says he first rebukes the wind. I mean, rebukes the wind, and then he like little admonishes them, like, why do you have so little faith? But that doesn't really matter right now. That's not my focal point. What we know from both the Gospels is that he did still the storm and he did admonish him, and now I'm going to look at Matthew chapter 8. Again, what surprises me about the disciples. Okay, now if you look at Matthew chapter 8, the beginning of Matthew chapter 8. It starts with Jesus actually healing a man with leprosy. Now, I'm not so sure whether this was like from the storm. I'm taking it to the beginning of the chapter. Okay, there are few events recorded here. I don't know whether it's 2 days, 3 days, 1 week. But what's important is that the disciples were with Jesus throughout. Okay, it starts with Jesus healing a man with leprosy. Then it goes on to the faith of a Roman officer. This Roman officer comes and he's like, Jesus, we know he heals the Roman officer's servant. And then after that, Jesus heals Peter's mother in law. And then after that, that evening, many more people were brought to him, demon possessed men, demon possessed people, those were evil spirits. I'm just saying, Jesus, no wonder he was napping, because it sounds like a really, really tiring week. And of course, we know this delighted Jesus, he had compassion everywhere he went. But I'm thinking about the disciples, like, were you all napping while Jesus was doing all these miracles? Like, you've seen him, you've experienced firsthand what this man claiming to be the Messiah is doing. And some part of them did believe, like, yes, this is the Son of God. But I'm wondering, why at this, like, when God was in the boat with them, when their friend, when their rabbi was in the boat with them, why were they so scared? Like, they've seen such amazing miracles. I'm only talking about Matthew chapter 8. I'm not talking about the earlier ones that have been recorded. Then I started to wonder, is it because, okay, now that he's been healing a lot of people, demon possessed and giving sight to the blind, they were like, okay, his job description, his skill set is mostly with people. Okay, Messiah, healer of the people, deliverer of the people, deliver sins. But I don't think they really believe he could control nature. Because if you look at the response, where I mean, I was even looking at the King James version, it says that their reaction was like they were terrified. Now, why would they get terrified? I understand the crowd getting terrified, but these people were with Jesus throughout. But if you think about it, just think about it, like, here's this man, he's sleeping. They just like wake him up. It's not like he says, okay, wait, let me just brush my teeth or whatever. He just like gets up, just looks at the storm. I want you to imagine it. And we've been seeing footage of a lot of, cyclones and tornadoes. And we've seen like even the seas, how they rise and, oh gosh, all that. And just seeing this man just stand up and very casually, very, very casually just saying, be still, just rebuking, just one word, rebuking the wind and the waves. And then suddenly there's this great calm. But the disciples, when they see this, it says that they were terrified. The KJV says they feared exceedingly. They are like, what manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? So I'm thinking like that. I found that a little like, oh my gosh, if I was in their place, I think I would have reacted the same way, because now I'm comfortable with Jesus healing people, right? But nature, now that is a total different ball game. Like, my gosh, like, will he be able to call out thunder, lightning? Because I think they also are like putting Jesus in a little box. Like, okay, this man is good with people. He's good. Okay, even raising the dead is like huge. But somehow with nature, I think that is like pretty. They never saw that before. So this suddenly they got terrified of him. Okay, now I'm going to leave the savage storm and the doubting disciples behind, and I'm going to come to us. How do we react to storms in our life? Are we able to be still and calm, mildly tense, but under control of the situation, under control of our emotions? Or like the disciples, do we cry our eyes out and scream our lungs out and shout at God, why is this happening? Where are you? Don't you care? Don't you care that I'm okay? Now, these are common stormy questions. Don't you care that I'm single? Don't you care that I'm not able to conceive? Don't you care that this tumor is growing? Don't you care that I'm broke and at the edge of a cliff? Don't you care that my child is struggling with multiple addictions? Don't you care that I'm broken? Don't you care? Don't you care? And I just want us to just pause for a bit, maybe just maybe 30 seconds. I want you to think about the storms that each of us have been going through. where if we can be honest before God, we've not really surrendered it to God. There's some part of us that is asking God, like, don't you care? Don't you care that I'm going through this? Just take a few seconds and just think of what that situation is. Okay, and I just want to assure you now that God hasn't abandoned the ship. He hasn't abandoned the boat. He's still in the boat. He's not left us to drown. It may look like that sometimes, because God is, just because he's silent doesn't mean he's inactive, doesn't mean he doesn't care. I want to just focus on Jesus. In the middle of a violent storm, how was he able to sleep? And that too deeply, like with a cushion. Because though Jesus, the man, was sleeping, he knew that his God, his Father, the one who made the heavens and the earth, would not let him stumble. Though he was sleeping, God was not sleeping. That the God who watched over him would not slumber. That his God, his Father, himself watched over him. The Lord was standing as not just his, but his disciples' protective shade. The Lord would keep watch over them and us now and forevermore. And this is from Psalm 121. So even though the disciples were with Jesus, the man, they forgot about Jesus, who was also God, and they forgot about his Father, and they just missed the point. Imagine if the storm came and they were so excited, in fact, instead of afraid. Like, oh my gosh, like, oh, the storm has come, woohoo, we get to see another miracle. But this is what happens when fear takes over, when fear consumes us. We can't think about anything else but the situation. Now I'm going to talk about three other people, who were part of a storm. Different storms, physical storms, of course. But because they walked and talked with God enough, they knew that the Lord had their back. The first person is Noah. Genesis 6 to 7, I've looked at. And, 40 days and 40 nights. It would have been stormy, right? They've never experienced rain before the earth was getting nourished from underground streams. And some commentators estimate that Noah was in the ark for 370 days. That sounds like a little more than a calendar year. Now, if he was on a world cruise, that would have been amazing, just going from port to port, 1 year world cruise. But this was one man with his family in a dark, electricity wasn't invented. So it wasn't like the Titanic, it was a dark ark and filled with every species of animals. So I'm just thinking, I know how he was spending his days in the ark. Probably they all were taking turns in just cleaning the ark and keeping it clean. But the Bible records that even before Noah could build the ark, the Bible said that he was righteous and blameless. And he was the only person who was righteous and blameless. And that's how he could. So God already told him about the storm. God already told him that, see, this is God shared, like that verse says, right? That God confided in him his plans. Why? Because this man was righteous. So that's why when the storm came, it couldn't shake him because he was righteous and he was walking with God and talking with God. The second person was Jonah. Now, yes, Jonah was disobedient. That's a given. But here's another person who was fast asleep in the middle of the storm. It says that everyone else was screaming and they were like, my gosh, so scared. And I'm sure, like I said, these people going up and down with cargo, they would have been used to storms. But something about this storm, just it really made them cry and be so scared. And here's this man who's sleeping. Everyone else was panicking, and he was like cool and fast asleep and dreaming dreams. And his reaction was so funny. And when they woke him up, and who are you and what are you doing here? He was just like, throw me in the sea and it'll all be calm again. Like there's no fear. Like if somebody had to wake me up again, if and then I had to get up and see the storm and to be honest, I'm really, one of my nightmares is I used to dream about the sea a lot, and especially like stormy seas. I don't know whether I saw some movie or something, but well, it was quite a recurring dream, like these dark like clouds and the waves, like these like 30-foot waves. And So I'm just thinking of somebody to wake me up, and that too I'm a stowaway. I've not bought passage, but I'm hiding. I would be like, please, sir, I'll like spare my life. I'll do anything. I'll clean and I'll cook. But here's a man who says, like, just throw me in and we'll be calm. And I was like, what a response. And I guess because he knew, he just knew that God was there. He knew why the storm was there, and he knew how to stop the storm as well. And I was while I was just reading this passage, I was like, God, I wish I knew what I needed to do to stop the storm. I wish I could, okay, just do this, like, okay, just give up TV for a month, the storm will stop. Or just stop eating non-veg, or just do this, or just do that. But as we all know personally, it doesn't work that way. So even though Jonah was disobedient, like what you realize from reading about Jonah's relationship with God, he did not doubt God's goodness. He knew he served a loving God, so loving that this God, that's why he ran away. Why? Because Ninevites were one of Israel's biggest enemies, the most cruel and really torturous people. But I think somewhere in his heart, he knew there was that fear, of course, to go and see the Ninevites. And then when we see like Jonah's reaction, because he knew his God was a loving God and his God was going to forgive these people. But again, my focus is this man's relationship with God, that this man was righteous. This man, knew, like he could have been afraid during the storm like the rest of the passengers, but he was like, no, just throw me in, everything will be calm. And the third person I'd like to focus on is Paul, Acts 27:13. Now, why wasn't he afraid of the storm? It says there was the gale, there was gale of force. Okay, there was a gale, forced winds. Okay, because he shares that an angel of the Lord came the night before and told him the plan, and not just the plan for him, but for everyone on the ship. So that's why he also, even though he was part of the storm, he could just stay calm. And one other amazing thing he did was encouraging the people, like, don't worry, none of you all will perish. And what do these three people have in common? Noah and Jonah and Paul, is that all of them were righteous and they loved God. All of them could count on God's track record. Now we see Paul like imprisoned and beaten, and despite all that, despite now, this was not the only storm he's been in. He's been in so many other storms. Like we've seen, like Paul get thrown into prison here. This one falsely accusing him. Sometimes his best friends and co-partners, like them having a big fight, them leaving him midway. But they could always look back and trust God's track record. And that's the reason why they could just stand firm on God, not doubt God when there was a physical storm. And with all three of them, even like other storms, can we ever be prepared for a storm? No. I mean, at least I'm thinking, no. You just, like the death of a loved one, how do you prepare for that? If it's somebody's been struggling with an illness, then maybe some portion of your heart may prepare, but still it won't be, still when the person dies, there's still that sense of deep loss. But say like sudden overnight somebody dies. Now during COVID, so many people lost loved ones, and sometimes a financial mess, sometimes just no way of really preparing for storms. Unless God confides in us, like he confided in Noah and Paul, that there's going to be a storm, there's going to be a flood. And it says, like Psalm 25:14 says, the Lord confides in those who fear him. He makes his covenant known to them. The storm may catch us off guard. It certainly caught the disciples off guard, but it never caught God off guard. And nothing can ever catch God off guard. And I just want to end, this message by just sharing that storms are hard, they're real. And I was feeling like a bit of a phony while I was preparing this, because I am going through, like, for a couple of weeks, I've been struggling in certain situations, and I've never been as VP as I've been now these last 2 weeks. Anything is sending me like crying and like, God, where are you? Why aren't you helping me? Like, why aren't you answering my prayer, Lord? And it's like coming from all sides, but like what I'm sharing with you all is it's just knowing God's track record, like seeing God's faithfulness, and all of you all probably have storms as well. Some you may have just gotten out of, some you may be in the middle of, and some may just be starting, like some news you've got. Just two things that you all can, like, I would encourage you to do. The first thing is don't start doubting. When you're in the middle of the storm, now see, we see the disciples immediately. They were like, don't you care? And thankfully we serve a God who doesn't get upset, and he doesn't like, oh, what? You're doubting me? I'm not going to stop the storm. You'll go drown. I don't care. But still, a God who, in spite of their fear, he still stops the storm. My request to you and to me is, when we are in the middle of a crisis, maybe it's a finance, maybe it's heartbreak, maybe it's an unanswered prayer, maybe it's sickness, that's the time to really lean on God's goodness. Now maybe is a good time to start journaling, or that's become a very popular word. Keeping a journal, keeping a little notebook, and just writing every time you made a prayer, every time you made a petition or a request to God, and God has answered it. So at times like this, you just run to that book and you'll see the amount of times God has been faithful. God has answered those prayers, those requests. When again you thought like, God, you were so scared, and God came through for you. He was faithful then. Sometimes, yes, we've seen in Hebrews chapter 11, sometimes God has another plan. It may not be for healing. It may not be, you know, sometimes like people will be praying for marriage or for children, and God is just silent. And I'm not a believer of like, oh, if God closes one door, he'll open a bigger door. Sometimes when God closes the door, it closes. And we have to just trust God. Okay, God, you created the door. You are the creator of everything. Let me just trust you. Let me just stand firm. And in Hebrews is one of the most encouraging verses, because it shows you both. It shows you those who prayers got answered. It says their loved ones were brought back. Then it also shows you people who prayed and their prayers weren't answered. In fact, they got beaten, and they were like, they said their loved ones were sawn into half. I think I got that word wrong. Sawed into half, yes. So the thing is, we have to understand that God's in control. We have to be very careful today, like all this name it, claim it, say it, take a verse and just like beat it to death. Like, no, God, you said this, you said this. You have to believe like God is sovereign. He knows what's best for us. And there are sometimes, see, he only says to us. And we have every right to ask as a child of God, like, God, I want this. But also, I think we need to reach a stage in our relationship with God where it's, God, I want this, but not my will, thy will be done. So, if we keep, if we just keep at this, I think, and one thing about faith, right, what I realized is, start building your faith on a day-to-day basis. Don't like, because then when a storm comes, right, that's not the time you have to go like, oh, you're looking around, like, do I have faith? Because we only know about our faith is when we are going through a storm. In a normal good day, all happy times and all, you won't even know how strong your faith is. It's only when you're in the middle of a storm, then you can see, like, only when you're thrown into the middle of a furnace or in the lines, then you can see, do I really have faith? Not like before, when you're just sitting in the palace or sitting in your home and everybody's safe, everybody's healthy, and you're like, life is good. No. So start building your faith, start praying, start, yes, so that when the storm comes, no, we're prepared. Not for the storm, but at least like, God, you're there. Then we don't, that, remember, Satan is also active during a storm. Satan's main role is to just separate us from God, to whisper those discouraging thoughts in our ears, like, man, you're going to drown. God loves you. Like, you're going to drown. He doesn't care. He's busy somewhere else. You're not so important. These are the times where we be like, God, I know you're not going to leave my hand. And the second thing is, don't stop praying. So the first point was, don't start doubting. The second one is, don't stop praying. Fast, pray, get down on your knees, whatever, however you connect with God. Like, I have my own way of connecting with God. Go through the storm with the word of God. In places like the US, they have like so many hurricanes and so many tornadoes. So they started, like I don't know when, but they build what is called a bunker. This is like a safe room, so that so even though they may lose their house like in the middle of this heavy winds and all, the family is safe underground, because for them their life is more precious, right? So for us, let the word of God be a bunker, so that when the storm is coming, we are safe. And what is in this bunker with us all? Just the promises, just the reassurance. God, you're with us, you're not going to fail me, you are there, you are faithful. We don't have to question God and like, God, where are you? Like, are you sleeping? Like, where are you? At the back of the boat? Get up, come and save us. No, we just are trusting God. The winds are raging, and the lightning is so fierce and the thunder's like deafening, but like, God, you're right here. You're right here next to me. And see, going through a storm is not optional. Jesus has already said that in this world there'll be many troubles. That is a given. We are going to have storms day in and day out. And sometimes they're not going to come one at a time with a pause, with a long period. Sometimes they're going to come all together. You're barely like recovering from one, and we see that in Job, right? He barely gets one piece of bad news and he's like trembling, and then another piece and another piece and another piece, and then finally the blow was when they said your children have gone. That's when he just falls apart. But there still he falls apart in God. So let's just take an example of Job. And the other thing is like, yes, storms are not optional, but going through the storm with God, now that's optional. Yes, God, you're here. I'm going to go through the storm with you. God may stop the storm, or He may allow it to rage for some time. Like, and like the crew, you may lose cargo. Like in Paul's ship, they lost cargo. They threw because they were so scared. You may lose just because we pray. I think we've realized over time that sometimes there will be loss, there will be financial loss, there will be personal loss. We may lose health, we may lose wealth, friends, family, which definitely will be a very painful experience. Just because we are Christian doesn't mean we're immune to pain and hurt and tears. But God will be with us. God is in control of the storm and the outcome on the other side. Once we finish the storm, He's still there. And just want to leave you all with these words, that it may have caught us off guard. It may have caught us unaware. Oh gosh, this storm suddenly, where did it come from? I was like walking with God, everything was good. I was praying, I was paying my tithe. My children are good, this, and why did this storm come? It have caught us off guard, but it hasn't surprised God. It hasn't, caught Him unawares. Like Psalm 121 says, He never slumbers, He never sleeps. And just trust that God is faithful and He'll get us through it. So thank you, everybody.